So you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there, YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. When last we left off, Grady McMurtry was getting just about everything wrong about both vestigial and retrogressive organs. Well, let's see what he has for us today. Grady, it's all you.
Just monkeys or apes. Actually, Charles Darwin said people evolved from monkeys. People will say he meant apes. I don't know whether he meant it or not, but he wrote monkeys.
Well, Grady has already repeatedly shown he's happy to just lie about Darwin, so let's find out. In Chapter 1 of Descent of Man, he says, "The correspondence in general structure, in the minute structures of tissues, in chemical composition, and in constitution between man and the higher animals, especially the anthropomorphous apes, is extremely close." In Chapter 6, he says, "It would be beyond my limits and quite beyond my knowledge even to name the innumerable points of structure in which man agrees with the other primates. Our great anatomist and philosopher, Professor Huxley, has fully discussed the subject, and concludes that man in all parts of his organization differs less from the higher apes than these do from the lower members of the same group. Consequently, there is no justification for placing man in a distinct order." He seems pretty clear on what he's talking about, and like for at least the third time, Grady McMurtry is just lying about Darwin, who I will remind everyone yet again is not the Messiah, he's not the Pope, he's not Rasul al-Ilm, he's just a guy who got some important stuff right, got plenty of stuff wrong, as we've already seen, and is historically, but no longer scientifically, important.
And let's examine the evidence.
You mean like the fact that the coccyx absolutely is a tailbone that starts out as an actual external tail?
There is no genetic evidence for a method whereby useless organs will necessarily deteriorate. We've never found a mechanism that would allow for the deterioration of anything.
Excuse me, the did you just say?
Isn't the whole creationist thing that he's been arguing for that all mutations are harmful or make things degenerate? But anyway, Shah et al. In 2021 actually found that the insertion of an ALU-derived intron in the TBXT gene in apes, humans included, disrupts the formation of the tail, and this was studied by mimicking this mutation in the genomes of lab mice, who then went on to have severely reduced tails or simply no tails at all, and even in some rare cases developed spinal birth defects that occur in about 0.1% of human births, again related to the tail. So we have a really good idea of the exact genetic mechanism right down to the specific mutation, the specific gene involved in tail loss. Okay, but let's also unpack that in terms of creationism. So without the extra intron, the TBXT gene, common in all primates and even in rodents, results in a long tail. Now, according to creationists, Adam and Eve are a separate creation from all other apes, but all apes have the same intron inserted into a gene that without it would result in a functional tail. So were apes and humans separately created with tails, and then they both independently had the same ALU insert into their TBXT genes in the same place? And if apes are actually two kinds, with gibbons being in one kind and the great apes, less humans, in another, did it happen 3 times independently? That's wildly unlikely. Did God just create 3 different groups of animals with otherwise functional TBXT genes only for him to break each one in the same way? That's certainly not anything one would predict on the basis of special creation. Of course, it doesn't just stop there. The gulo pseudogene is the remnants of a gene that in most mammals makes vitamin C, but in tarsiers and monkeys, apes included, yes, even humans, it's broken in exactly the same way. So there are now 6 distinct created kinds, according to most creationists, that, all happen to independently break their vitamin C gene in the exact same way, while also being taxonomically united as a group that evolution would see as monophyletic without this particular gene breakage? Yeah, sure, that checks out. That doesn't sound post hoc in the least.
The function of an organ may not yet be discovered. What if you have a vestigial retrogressive organ as they're named?
Again, something can be vestigial without being retrogressive, and it can be retrogressive without being vestigial. And some organs can be both. I'd argue most organs that are one are probably both, but that is not a requirement.
But you don't know the function for it. You don't know for use of it and so forth. What does that really prove?
Well, ignoring the word prove, it shows that unlike what would be expected from intelligent design, the creature in question is evidently descended from organisms with a more well-developed organ of the same kind that is used for the typical purpose, showing that this organism shares common ancestry with such creatures for whom the organ in question is neither vestigial nor retrogressive.
What it really proves is we've just not been smart enough to figure it out yet. Is that correct?
In some cases, sure.
So it doesn't mean it doesn't have a function. It just simply means we haven't been smart enough to figure out what it is.
Maybe, but it also could just mean that the structure in question just doesn't have a function. It's hard to see what the purpose of the collapsed lung of a snake or the atrophied and not productive ovary of a bird would have. Maybe there's something that they're really vitally important for, or even just a bit important for. But I doubt it.
Now, I have a different opinion. As a creationist, I figure if there's a structure or an organ there, God put it there and it has a reason. Whether I've been smart enough to figure it out or not is irrelevant.
It's also irrelevant to the question of whether the structure is vestigial or retrogressive.
I think it had one, still does.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
No one cares, Grady. You're a demonstrable liar and idiot.
And the function of an organ may be taken up by another organ when it is removed. For example, aren't you glad you have 2 kidneys?
No, that's not what it means. It's not talking about redundant paired organs. It's saying that, hey, when turtles become more and more aquatic, eventually the anal end of their digestive tract started to take oxygen up from the water so that they could stay underwater longer, thereby taking up some of the function of the lungs. Or when birds lost the ability that's common in most other reptiles to breathe by using muscles that going from the spine to the ribs to expand their rib cages, other muscles in the throat as well as in the limbs took over the respiration duties. A lung or a kidney just doing more lung or kidney stuff isn't a different organ taking over. It's the same organ just doing more.
Or how about the spleen? You can remove the spleen, but then the liver kind of picks up the function and so forth.
There it is. Gold star to Grady.
So God has built in redundancy here because think about it. If you lost just one of these things, well, you would die, but God has built in these, systems that they can overlap. And the list of useful structures has decreased to 0.
I think he means useless, but also that's not true. There's no function to the ear muscles that humans can use to ever so slightly raise their ears. The palmaris longus muscle of the arm produces no actual effect, and some 15% of humans don't even have it. It's so useless it gets used for grafting with no long-term effects on mobility after removal. That's just 2 right there.
As our knowledge has increased, today we know of at least 1 or more valuable functions for every structure or organ listed by Dr. Wiedersheim in his book. So after 100 years of research, the number's down to 0.
Oh, maybe, yeah, the ones in his book. I don't know. I don't care. I'm not going to go read a century-old book on human anatomy when there are new sources and they directly contradict Grady's points.
What about vestigial structures in other creatures? I mean, again, evolutionists are always pointing at these things. For example, they talk about the, quote, hip bones, unquote, in whales, or they'll talk about the spurs in snakes. They will say these hip bones are the leftover pelvis from a cow.
No, not a cow. Cows and whales are both artiodactyls, but whales are most closely related to hippos, forming the clade Whippomorpha. The next group closest after hippos is the ruminants, as a whole, including the cows and bovidae, but also Giraffidae, Antilocapridae, Moschidae, and Cervidae. So a whale is no more closely related to a cow than it is to a giraffe, a pronghorn, a musk deer, or a moose. And the common ancestor of a whale and a cow was neither a cow nor a whale. This isn't really all that complicated, but hey, it wouldn't be young Earth creationism if it didn't get almost everything wrong for basically no reason.
They'll say the spurs are just leftover legs from when snakes had legs.
Because they develop from the embryonic hind limb buds, and they even have unguals, the toe bones that bear claws. They're absolutely hind legs, and they are absolutely useless for the normal thing hind legs do. Help the animal walk. The spurs even attach to little pelvic bones.
But let's take a look at the truth. Now, this is a textbook showing the supposed evolution of snakes, whales, and horses. In the textbook right here it says, whales and snakes have vestigial hip bones and leg bones. Horses once had 4 functional toes. Now they walk on just 1 toe. The others are no longer functional. Now, let me stop for just a minute and ask a question. If horses started out with 4 toes, they now have 1 toe. Please tell me, is that the adding of information or the subtracting of previously existing information?
I would love to be able to answer that question, but since we have no way to measure the information in a genome that creationists have ever accepted, there's no way to know for sure. I, however, suspect that measuring the genome either in terms of number of functional elements, or in terms of gross genome length, or in terms of size of all functional elements, which are the only ways that I can think of to objectively measure such a thing, that it's neither a loss nor a gain, and is simply a different way the same information is expressed, especially since different digits all form from basically the same Hox genes.
Well, it would be the subtraction of previously existing information, is that correct?
Maybe, but I doubt it. Sure would be nice if we had, I don't know, a way to check?
Now, I don't think that's how horses came into existence.
Interesting, because at least Answers in Genesis seems to think that horses originally had at least 3 toes, as you can see in this picture of their horse-kind ancestors on the Ark encounter. In fact, they just put Mesohippus on the Ark and called it good.
But that wouldn't be getting bigger, better, faster, smarter. That would be getting smaller, slower, and dumber.
Horses are some of the fastest animals on Earth specifically because of their 1 toe, and they are also some of the largest land animals on the planet, and they're also extremely intelligent and can learn many tricks from human trainers, and can also manage complex social hierarchies and interactions in herds. Unless Grady here has some new evidence that Mesohippus was bigger, faster, and smarter than a modern horse, which seems far-fetched given how small it was, I'm going to have to say that he's just making things up again at best, and at worst is just knowingly lying. Does he think that if you lose a finger, some IQ points go with it or something? Is brain power stored in the toes? Is pee stored in the balls? That's the level we're operating at here.
And what about snakes? This is another textbook right here on biology. And here it's showing an illustration of the 2 spurs and pythons and so forth. And the textbook says that these are rudimentary hind legs. Well, they're not rudimentary hind legs. Snakes never had legs to start with.
Then why do they grow limb buds in embryo that in some snakes turn into spurs? Oh right, because they absolutely did have legs. In fact, most creationists tend to think that snakes had legs in the Garden of Eden, but lost them when God cursed them to crawl on their bellies after a serpent tricked Eve into eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil by... Let me check. Oh, right, telling her the truth.
And evolutionists will say these are just the deteriorated hind legs.
No, they're not just that. They retain functions in mating and in interspecific competition for mates, which they also probably had before they became useless for locomotion. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that real scientists say the word just a whole lot less than you'd think if you listen to Grady here.
Now, here's a close-up photograph of a boa constrictor, python skin here, with these spurs. Now, evolutionists say that these are just the decay of a previous structure.
No, decay is what happens to things when they die, not what happens to structures as they become vestigial. They're the vestiges of functional locomotory organs that retain some secondary functions, but have clearly lost the primary function such organs fulfill in other organisms with homologous organs.
But actually, they're absolutely essential to various kinds of snakes. You see, the male uses these spurs to manipulate the female for copulation. Without them, the snakes can't mate. Now, I think you'll agree with me, if you're a snake, that's really important. So they do have a known function, but they're not the rudiments of something else.
Yeah, I'm sure a pelvic structure from which extends a series of bones ending in a claw that's closely associated with the anus, after which a post-anal tail extends, and that develops from hind limb buds in embryo, has nothing at all to do with legs.
This isn't some deteriorated structure. It's a very wise design.
I would love it if he had something other than just nuh-uh for the spurs of snakes not being legs.
And here, now, we have a dictionary on science that says again about the word vestigial. It says whales, for example, have small bones located in the muscles of their body walls that are vestigial bones of hips and hind limbs. Well, I disagree with that statement, but this is what this science dictionary said in 2005.
Disagree all you like, but they're still, just like snake spurs, bones that are derived from the hind limb buds in embryo are associated with morphologically distinct vertebrae that are sacral vertebrae, that is hip vertebrae, and the anus is near those bones, and posterior to those bones, the vertebrae are caudal. So it's pretty conclusive that these bones are hip and limb bones.
Now, there are groups of people who will still tell you that whales evolved from cows.
No, because that was never the consensus, or even a hypothesis. That's just a straw man. As I've already gone over.
Now, I would like all of you to do an interesting little experiment. In your head, I would like you to just fast as you can, in your mind, see a creature that's half cow, half whale. Got it? Now, according to evolutionists, that would be a transitional form.
Jesus Christ, no. Cows and whales are both independently derived artiodactyls. A half cow, half whale would falsify evolution. Why is it every time a creationist tries to explain the predictions of evolution, or imagines what might be evidence of evolution, they come up with something that would directly contradict evolution?
But somehow, no, there's a mixture between a cow becoming a whale, and there's a transitional form of the two. Now, the fact of the matter is, we've never found any such creature.
Look, it's been a while, so let's have the transitional fossil slideshow, and I'll highlight the transitional whales.
This is believed in by faith.
Yeah, Pakicetus, Nalacetus, Ichthyolestes, Ambulocetus, Gondacacia, Himalayacetus, Andrewcephus, Atokacetus, Dalanestes, Cuchacetus, Remingtonocetus, Aegicetus, Babiacetus, Carolinacetus, Georgiacetus, Pontobacilius, Macaracetus, Egyptocetus, Ardiocetus, Cronatocetus, Dedicetus, Indocetus, Malacetus, Paragocetus, Protocetus, Kaisercetus, Rhodocetus, Tacrocetus, Togocetus, Basilosaurus, Basiloterus, Eocetus, and Calocetus, Basilotritus, Chrysocetus, Syntheocetus, Dorudon, Mastrocetus, Okukayea, Sagacetus, Stromerius, Supayacetus, Zygorrhiza, and Kekenodon are all just things that don't exist and people only believe in them based on faith. That's exactly how it works.
And here are some biology textbooks just to prove it. This is from 2006. Here is this whale, and you see these hip bones in the back end here. They say, well, these are the vestigial hip bones and so forth, when the whale was a cow. And they say that's just the pelvis that is deteriorating away. This is actually a university-level textbook from 2005. Again, we see a similar drawing of a whale with these hip bones in the back, as they call them. And they say, again, that this is just a deterioration. Or here's another one. This is from 1989, but again, we have a whale with these pelvic and femur bones back here. And it says this: many organisms retain traces of their evolutionary history. So many organisms retain traces of their evolutionary history. For example, the whale retains pelvic and leg bones as useless vestiges.
Oh, for f***'s sake, how many examples does he need to make his point?
Another one, 1998. We see the same thing here. The textbook says, whales have a vestigial pelvis and leg bones that serve no purpose. These structures are evidence of the whale's evolution from four-legged land-dwelling animals. Here's another one. Notice what it says here. Modern whales have hind limbs which have been reduced to only a few tiny internal hind limb bones that have no function. Okay, now we're getting to the vestigial. And I love this one. This is a textbook for children, and it says here, just imagine whales walking around. It's true. Well, no, it's not true. It's a lie.
I can't wait for Grady to open a movie theater because he's an expert at projection.
Just imagine whales walking around. It's true.
Also, he steals material from Kent Hovind. You know, the guy who drove the Baptist grape bus. Except remove the G from grape. Imagine being so bad at your job that you're a bad copycat of the guy even other pseudoscientists avoid because he's just too dumb.
You have to imagine this. There's no science to support this. That's faith.
You know what? Here's Dapper from the very recent past. Yeah, Pakicetus, Nalacetus, Ichthyolestes, Ambulocetus, Gondacacia, Himalayacetus, Andrewcephus, Atokacetus, Dalanestes, Cuchacetus, Remingtonocetus, Aegicetus, Babiacetus, Carolinacetus, Georgiacetus, Pontobacilius, Macaracetus, Egyptocetus, Ardiocetus, Cronatocetus, Dedicetus, Indocetus, Malacetus, Paragocetus, Protocetus, Kaisercetus, Rhodocetus, Tacrocetus, Togocetus, Basilosaurus, Basiloterus, Eocetus, and Calocetus, Basilotritus, Chrysocetus, Syntheocetus, Dorudon, Mastrocetus, Okukayea, Sagacetus, Stromerius, Supayacetus, Zygorrhiza, and Kekenodon are all just things that don't exist and people only believe in them based on faith. That's exactly how it works.
Now here at the Los Angeles, California Museum of Natural History, we see an actual whale skeleton, and you can actually see here are the actual bones that they're talking about. That's what they really do look like.
Hey, he just displayed on screen the transition from sacral to caudal vertebrae associated with the pelvic bones. Always nice when the creationist shows how they're wrong on their own slides. Makes my job easier.
But think with me for a moment.
Hey, maybe this time he'll actually think. There's a first time for everything, you know?
Here in this textbook page, it says such structures which are considered to be evidence of an organism's evolutionary past are called vestigial structures. But the fact of the matter is that actually there are no such things as vestigial organs.
That's odd because he's showing us some right now, and unless he can show us a modern whale walking with those hips and legs, they're definitely vestigial.
Even if there were, that would be the opposite of evolution.
Evolution is at a minimum a change in allele frequencies in a population over generations. This seems like it would certainly be the result of that, so yes, it is evolution. Good to know that the threatened thinking still isn't occurring.
And let's talk about whales for just a second.
I hear it's a lovely place, full of interesting people who are certainly not doing anything untoward with sheep.
Those bones in the back end of a whale.
Oh, we're still on the animals. Even after he showed great evidence that pelvic and hind limb bones are exactly what science knows them to be, pelvic and hind limb bones. Oh well, let's hear it.
Are not the deteriorated, disintegrating hip and pelvis bones of a cow or something like that.
Right, because whales didn't evolve from cows.
Those bones are actually useful to the whale in two ways. Number one, the whale uses those bones, again, in copulation. Without those bones, a whale can't mate. So, again, if you're a whale, I think that's a really important feature.
I feel like pointing out that a mammal finds its pelvic bones important for mating isn't exactly new. Now, maybe Grady has just never actually had a sexual encounter with another mammal in his life, but presumably he at least understands the basics of the idea, right? Does he think that mammal reproduction normally just doesn't involve the hip bones or the legs? That seems pretty far-fetched. Nothing about retaining the usefulness in mating that all mammal hips have makes them not pelvic bones, but they still don't have the locomotor function, so they're still vestigial.
But there's something else, too. Those bones are actually a pivot point, which a mechanical engineer would admire. Because you see, whales are mammals, and their tail goes up and down like so. And, well, if you don't have those bones right there, then the muscles that would require the whale's tail to go up and down would have to extend from one end of the animal to the other. The muscles would become so large, a whale couldn't exist.
I'm sorry, so is the argument now that they can't be pelvic bones because tail muscles attach to them? Does he think that that's not how normal pelvises work? Honestly, why does he keep pointing out ways in which the bones act like pelvic bones in order to say that they're not pelvic bones? Or is he saying that they are, but they're not vestigial because they retain some but not all of the functions of a pelvis? Well, if that's the argument, it's still pretty darn dumb, because that's what vestigial structures are.
But because of these bones being a pivot point, you have muscles going from the front to the bones, and then another muscle goes from the bone to the tip of the tail, and because of this, the muscles can be much smaller and they can fit inside the whale. So these are a cleverly designed engineering pivot point to attach the muscles that go to both ends of the body, which allow a whale to actually live.
This just in, abdominal muscles attach the pelvis of whales, just like, in other animals with a pelvis. Is he even trying? This is just the third pelvis thing he's pointed out about whales to say that they don't have vestigial pelvises. Grady, if you watch this, which you probably won't, in the future, maybe don't do my job for me.
And so it's a very good design feature. And so the whale needs them for two reasons.
Pointing out that a vestigial structure exists but is still important isn't good evidence of design. What about all the sea life that manages to get along just fine without a pelvis? What, did God just decide one day to have a goof and give the whales a pelvis but not to bother with, say, whale sharks? Is this different design evidence of different designers?
Now let's talk about the recapitulation theory of embryonic development, or as Ernst Haeckel called it, the biogenetic law.
Why? Haeckel's biogenetic laws have been known to be false for like a century, and it's not part of science. Oh well, I knew what I was signing up for when I decided to make this series. Let's get into it.
Now, Ernst Haeckel was a direct disciple of Charles Darwin. Origin of Species was published in English in 1859, in the fall of 1859. By 1860, it was already translated into German. Now, Dr. Ernst Haeckel, which, by the way, is one of only 2 major evolutionists of the 1800s to even have a PhD.
Good thing degrees aren't a requirement to do science, I guess.
Remember that Charles Darwin was not a scientist. His only degree was in theology.
If you do science, you're a scientist. Darwin did science, so he was a scientist. Doesn't matter if you have a degree in it. Degrees help you be better equipped to do good science, but you can still do good science without them. It's like the difference between taking classes in how to code versus being self-taught. If you can code, and if you're good at it, it doesn't matter if you took a class or not. The proof is in the code you write. Same for science. Degrees help, but if the work is sound, it speaks for itself.
Well, Dr. Ernst Haeckel had a tenured position at Jena University, and he read Darwin. Now, he'd grown up in a marginally Christian home, but he read Darwin in 1860 and emphatically became a solid atheistic evolutionist the rest of his life. Now, this is a guy who so believed in evolution, he actually made up 4 different things to support the concept of evolution for which there is no scientific basis.
Sure, Haeckel was the worst man to ever live. He lied about everything. He was possessed by Satan himself, and everything he did was to trick people into going to hell. Guess what? It doesn't matter to science, because science doesn't care what Haeckel thought. In fact, we now know that most of the ideas that we can attribute to him are false.
One of his major frauds is called the biogenetic law.
Not sure getting something wrong constitutes a fraud, but if it does, then I guess Grady McMurtry here is a pretty big fraud and maybe shouldn't be one to talk.
Now, first of all, what does recapitulation theory, what does this terminology ontogeny, recapitulates, phylogeny really mean? I know those are big words for a lot of people. But Ernst Haeckel came up with this recapitulation theory, or it's ontogeny begets phylogeny, or recapitulates phylogeny. What does it all really mean? Well, to make it simple, ontogeny is the biological development of the individual, and Haeckel said that the biological development of the individual, our evolutionary past, recapitulates or is repeated briefly in phylogeny. That's the evolutionary development of the individual.
And he got it backwards. Fun times.
What Haeckel said was this, that from conception, in your mother's womb during 9 months, when you were conceived, you were a jellyfish.
I'm pretty damn sure he didn't start with a jellyfish, but okay.
But then you became a fish. Then you became an amphibian. Then you became a reptile. Then you became a mammal, and you were only born human. Now, he went around Europe teaching this to people. Now, the theory speculates that in the development of the human embryo, it passes through the evolutionary stages that were encountered in the supposed evolution of man, and that it goes from being a protozoan to a worm to a fish to amphibian to mammal to human, so all in your mother's womb.
No jellyfish this time, huh? Cool.
Now, this was disproven long, long ago.
Yes it was, which is why I'm wondering why we're even talking about it. I feel like he wouldn't appreciate me criticizing his ideas because the flat earth is dumb, which it is, but he doesn't believe it either. Can we all agree Haeckel was very wrong about recapitulation?
But I wonder if these pictures look familiar to you.
Yep, they're Haeckel's drawings, which I'll agree shouldn't be used anymore because we have photographs which can make the same argument for evolution from embryology far better, and because the way embryological development also follows a nested hierarchy of adult morphology and genetics. And remember, recapitulation is wrong, but embryology still provides great evidence for evolution because of the way that embryological development also follows the nested hierarchy of adult morphology and genetics. It's almost like a third line of independent evidence pointing to universal common ancestry and evolution. Pretty neat, right?
Does anybody remember in school being shown those drawings right there? Because this is a picture of the original drawings of Ernst Haeckel.
I actually don't remember being shown this drawing, but that doesn't mean I wasn't.
And he was showing here, well, we all look very much the same at conception, but as we develop, we become what we end up being here. But at the beginning, we're all exactly the same. Now, it's not true. It's been disproven long ago.
Oh, okay, here's a sheep, a pig, a turtle, a whale, and a human embryo. Can you tell which one is which? Probably not. Seems like it's more true than false that early on embryos of tetrapods really look like each other.
These drawings are totally faked. As a matter of fact, he stole the drawings of legitimate embryologists.
Wait, if they're fake, then they're not stolen legitimate drawings. If I stole someone's sketch of a real thing, that doesn't make the sketch fake. Once again, we're back to trouble with basic logic.
He himself took a pencil and an eraser and he erased some of the lines, he drew in other lines. This is an absolute fake. It's a fraud. It's a hoax. It's fantasy.
Oh, okay, so he went with the let me copy your homework, but I'll change it a bit so it doesn't look obvious route. Okay, whatever. I don't actually care to defend Haeckel, even though, as far as I can tell, this accusation of copying has never actually been made anywhere in the literature.
Now, what's the truth about the drawings? He stole them, he intentionally changed them to fit his evolutionary theory, and the actual embryos are quite different from the diagrams. For example, up on top we see the drawings of Ernst Haeckel. Below we see photographs of these creatures as they actually look at the time that is supposed to be represented in the drawings. This comes from 1997, Dr. Richardson working in London. And, well, Haeckel's whole theory was just a fake, a fraud, a hoax, it's fantasy.
And that's where the Haeckel discussion mercifully ends.
And let's take a look at the law of biogenesis. You see, Haeckel's law was the biogenetic law, which is a fake, a fraud, a hoax, a fantasy. But let's take a look at the law of biogenesis. Now, what is the law of biogenesis, or it can be pronounced biogenesis?
Who else is sensing a conflation of spontaneous generation with abiogenesis coming up?
So, life only comes from life and only reproduces after its own kind. That life doesn't come from non-life, and life doesn't change into something else later.
Add modern in before life and get rid of the kind thing, since that's a made-up nonsense term, and yeah, close enough.
Now, actually, the proof that life does not evolve and did not come from non-living material to living material.
Yeah, and no origin of life researchers think that the first life on Earth was a multicellular animal complete with a brain, digestive tract, wings, legs, etc. It was probably not even properly a cell. So why are we talking about this again?
By random chance, it started with experiments going back to Francesca Redi. Francesca Redi simply said in the day when people believed that flies spontaneously generated from rotting meat, simply did a little experiment. He took rotting meat, allowed flies to lay eggs, you got flies, you got maggots.
Those are separate propositions. Even if abiogenesis were impossible, evolution would still happen. Evolution is the inevitable result of having organisms who reproduce inexactly. It would happen even under a general or special creation scenario, in which life is created ex nihilo by God.
He took meat, he got it where the flies could smell it, but they couldn't get to it. They tried to lay eggs, but they couldn't get to the meat. But when he sealed the rotting meat completely where the flies couldn't even smell it, the flies didn't come anywhere near it. And unless flies lay eggs, you don't get maggots. It was that simple. Now, Louis Pasteur made it much, much more sophisticated. He took all the ingredients in food necessary for life, put them in a flask. It's what he called his swan-necked flask. He bent the glass so there's a long swan neck to it. He then pasteurized by boiling the material, but everything that was needed for life was there. But he left the end open to satisfy evolutionists.
You'd think he'd be a little bit more subtle about adding in the anti-evolution for no reason other than it helps him lie, but oh well.
Now, bacteria could float in the air, dust could float in the air and get to the bottom of the swan neck, but it couldn't crawl up the swan neck. And even though the tube was open to the air, if bacteria could not get to the broth, nothing ever developed. And he proved that life only comes from life and only reproduces after its own kind.
No, he was disproving spontaneous generation, which is an explicitly supernaturalist, not evolutionary idea. The idea is that there is a vital energy which escapes from life when it dies, but can then go on to create more life, whether relatively simple bacteria or even complex animals like maggots or mice. It had nothing to do with abiogenesis research or with evolutionary biology whatsoever.
How does the law of biogenesis contradict the various theories of evolution? Well,
by not doing so. I guess that's it for the series. I hope you enjoyed it. Okay, fine, he's not done. I'll do the rest of it, but I'll do it next time. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, why not hit like and leave a comment telling me what you liked? If you didn't, hit dislike and tell me why not in the comments. Either way, I hope you subscribe and hit the bell icon to turn on all notifications so you're always notified when I have new content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Thanks for watching, but before you go, I just want to say a special thank you to my channel members and my patrons, especially those pledging $20 or above. Bob Knob, Work in Progress, Benthoven, Tapioca Weasel, Danny5252, Eleron Teller, Furavara, Ian Chen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babby, San, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, Scriptic Mystic, Dr. Tapioca Weasel, and Pat L. Dennis. As you probably know, YouTube is a very volatile platform, and from month to month my income on the channel can swing wildly. But the people you see on screen are directly supporting so that I don't have to worry too much about that, and the channel can keep going as it is, and perhaps even improving. If you'd like to join this team, there are links below to join the channel or in the description to join the Patreon. The Patreon starts as low as $1 a month, and the channel memberships start as low as $1.99 a month. On Patreon, you can even get a discount for pledging annually. If you do decide to pledge, you'll get access to an exclusive Discord server just for channel supporters, as well as early access to all of my pre-recorded videos, often up to 2 months in advance. Higher tiers will unlock even better perks. Now, if the annual or monthly pledge isn't right for you, but you still want to support the channel, there is a merch store down in the description, as well as an Amazon wishlist, just for me. And if financial support isn't something you can or want to do, then if you still want to help out the channel, please just like and share these videos and make sure you comment on them. It really helps the channel out. Thanks again for watching.
You found the skull.